Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. We have a very special guest who's doing very special things. And she actually has, unlike most people today, testicularity. She has courage. She's not afraid to stand up for the Constitution and for what's right. If any of you out there still know that there's such a thing as right and wrong. And her name is Leslie MANOOKIan. And she is involved suing the LA Unified School District. And I'm going to let Leslie explain that situation and what her foundation does. So go ahead, Leslie.
Yes. So at the beginning of 2020, well, let me just back up. I made a documentary film on vaccines. It came out in 2011, and it impressed upon me the importance of health freedom and our constitutionally protected rights. It helped me to understand why it was an issue in this country, and I believed it was going to be a bigger issue in the coming years. So when 2020 unfolded, I could see where this was going. And I say that because there was so much legislation put in place in the preceding 20 years that actually facilitated what we experienced in the last 3 years. So when 2020 unfolded, I knew where this was headed. And I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to start a nonprofit focused on pushing back against these things. So we're going to educate people about their rights. We're going to help teach them how to advocate for their rights. And we are going to litigate when necessary. And so that was the impetus behind me founding Health Freedom Defense Fund. And you can find us at healthfreedomdefense.org. But so that was the whole point. And we've now sued the Biden administration 3 times. We are responsible for taking down the federal travel mask mandate. That's our biggest accomplishment thus far. Hopefully your listeners are well aware of that and applauding us as they're listening to us, because I know most people were ripping their masks off mid-flight or train or wherever they were. And so that's what we did. But we've also sued the Los Angeles Unified School District twice. And the reason for that is because these people are frankly bullies. They don't seem to care about science. They say they do. They say they care about people and their well-being, but they have fired or displaced over 1,000 employees from the Los Angeles Unified School District. They met with Fauci the night before they locked down. They were the first school district in the United States to lock down. I find that very interesting. And we learned through depositions that they acknowledged themselves in the spring of 2021 that there was no longer an emergency. And yet they mandated the shots in the middle of August of 2021. Why would they do that? So we sued them. We first sued them over their mandate for the emergency use authorized vaccination. And the day after we sued, they rescinded their mandate. But that case had to work its way through the courts. And so that case finally got to in front of the judge in July of 2021. And we submitted all of our briefings to the court, and LAUSD and their attorneys did as well. And LAUSD's attorneys represented to the court, and LAUSD did as well, that they did not have and were not intending to mandate the vaccine. The court dismissed our case, saying that it was no longer ripe. There was no longer an issue that needed to be adjudicated on July 27th. And 17 days later, LAUSD issued a mandate for the shots. Crazy, isn't it? I mean, just complete defiance of, I mean, talk about dishonorable and dishonest. They lied to the court.
Yeah, well, I have a saying that when something does not make logical sense, such as eating a slice of pizza and then putting back your mask, and then eating another slice and putting back your mask afterwards, that's not logical. And when something has no logic, that means there's an agenda behind it. There is a concerted effort or conspiracy involved. Otherwise, you could logically, Occam's razor, they talk about this, the simplest explanation. When you have insanity like that, I'm an attorney, and they were telling me to put on a mask in order to do real estate closings. And I refused. I will not wear a mask at all under any circumstances. I will not go to airports. I will not go to restaurants. I will not go to drugstores. But, look, most people, they don't speak English. They don't speak Spanish. They speak bah. That's what they are. They're sheep. And we don't have people like yourself. And I just had a great conversation with Naomi Wolf. And Naomi is not coming from the same place that I'm coming from, because I am hardcore right wing. And when I say right wing, I don't mean Trump right wing. I mean Constitution right wing. I mean Thomas Jefferson, not Alexander Hamilton, but James Madison and Patrick Henry right wing. That kind of right.
My hero.
Oh, unbelievable. And today you might be somebody who traditionally was a Democrat or a so-called liberal or so-called conservative. It doesn't matter anymore. These labels are nonsense, because if you're not for free speech, you're a fascist, period. I don't care who you are or what you are a fascist. And if you want to violate the Nuremberg Code, you're a Nazi, because that's what the Nazis did. They did experiments on Jews and gave them all kinds of drugs and medical treatments and turned them into laboratory rats. And the Nuremberg courts executed these people. And yet we have nothing happening here. So I'll let you go on and continue.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that we live in this, it's frankly Orwellian, right? Lies are truth. War is peace, and all these kinds of things. We are supposed to believe that a mask can stop a microscopic virus, but it won't stop you from breathing. That's crazy, right? Which leads to lower oxygenation levels and then higher CO2 in the body, and a huge cascade of impairment, along with damage to sperm and reproductive abilities. So, this is really interesting, and it ties in with very much with the Pfizer documents that Naomi's been releasing. The scientists and doctors that I speak with say that the masks are actually contributing to fertility impairment. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, I read that study. My wife is a PhD in science, and she also has a postdoctorate in genetic engineering.
Yeah.
So she's very familiar with all of this.
Yeah.
And she didn't understand the political machinations until I educated her, and now she gets it entirely.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
anyway,
if you ever need help, she'd be glad to help you scientifically. And also my friend here in Great Neck, Dr. Alan Katz, who's been a doctor for 45 years, and he's been banned from the hospital for questioning the efficacy of the COVID vaccine. And here's a guy with incredible degrees, and he's also a lawyer and a doctor. That's pretty hard to do. And yet they threw him out of the hospital. That shows you what's going on here.
It's not about the truth. It's not about science. It's about an agenda. We mentioned that, already in our conversation. There's no doubt in my mind. And even speaking about, where we are, I was a hardcore leftist through my whole career up until about 15 years ago.
I had a feeling.
What's that?
I had a vibration that you were. Really?
I used to joke. I worked for Goldman Sachs.
No.
I worked for Alliance Capital. I worked in finance. I went to the University of Chicago to get my MBA, and then went to Goldman, and then got transferred to London. And I used to joke that I was the only socialist on Wall Street, and that the only problem, I really fully believed, Bob, that the only problem in the world was that people like me who were high earners weren't paying enough money in taxes. And that if we just paid more, literally more, I already paid half of my ginormous salary, that the world would be okay, that the government would have all the money it needed to do its work. I really believe that. And getting into making my movie, The Greater Good, and understanding who actually supported exposing corruption and malfeasance in government changed my entire worldview. And so I would argue that it's not about left or right. It's about fascism at one side and freedom at the other.
That's
and
right.
There's this whole, there's one end which believes in telling other people what to say, how to control their speech, what to put into their bodies, how to live their lives, literally compelled speech, compelled dress, all these things. This is what's happening. And at the far other side, you can call it the right. I refuse to be pigeonholed in that way, but I'm a devotee of Patrick Henry. I think he's one of the greatest men who ever lived.
That's
And what
right.
did he stand for? He stood for our individual rights. That's what he stood for. And he is the reason that we have a Bill of Rights, right? He insisted. He looked at the Constitution as it was drafted and he said, hey, something's missing here. We're just replacing the dictates of the king with the dictates of the Constitution unless we have a Bill of Rights. And so we insisted on that. And so I'm over there in that camp. And you can call it right if you want. I don't think that's accurate. I stand for freedom, and I stand for all kinds of freedom. That's it.
Yeah, the real definition of right and left is nothing the way most people think. Originally, the definition was that the further right you were, the more you believed that the government should stay out of your life. And as you moved to the left, you got to Republican, and then you got to conservative, and then you got to liberal, and you got to socialist. And the socialists and the communists and the fascists, they're all the same. The left wing is authoritarian. The right wing is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot, as you know, I was telling this to Bobby Kennedy's publisher, you can't turn the Bill of Rights into a Chinese menu and say, I'll have one from column A and one from column B. You're either for the Bill of Rights or you're not. And as Bobby Kennedy has properly pointed out, the founding fathers, who were a lot smarter than the imbeciles running America today, they were very familiar with pandemics. There was a slew of pandemics in the colonial days, and they didn't write an emergency exception. And the American people, including lawyers, and I went to law school, know zero about the Constitution, absolutely nothing. They wouldn't know the Constitution if I hit them over the head with it. And that's a very dangerous situation because you have to have a population that, if not God-fearing, must at least have character. And I would come from the point of view that that's related. But even if you're an atheist, you have to have character. You have to have a parameter of moral principles, which clearly you have, because you coming from the left, so-called, and me coming from the right, what happened to the leftists who quite properly protested the Vietnam War, who had the Mario Savio free speech movement? And now it's mostly the leftists that are trying to shut me up. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it also used to be that the left stood for holistic medicine and
Right.
more, natural ways of living and things like this. And they're the sheep who went and all got the shot. It's just jaw dropping. So when we were making our movie, this is what woke me up, because I'm actually a qualified homeopath as well.
Oh.
And I raised my son exclusively on homeopathy, which is actually an energy medicine, but it's a system of medicine that's been around for over 200 years. And I believe it's the biggest threat to modern medicine, conventional medicine, which is why the FDA and the powers that be and the pharmaceutical industry are constantly trying to make it illegal and attack it and smear it as quackery, when it is literally the most magical medicine you've ever encountered in your life. Once you try it, it's jaw-dropping. And so I don't it's been impossible to reconcile how these people that I thought were on my side, who supported all these things, organic, food and stuff like this, they were the ones for that originally.
Yeah.
And yet they don't support you deciding whether or not to inject an experimental, a risky, and a demonstrably unsafe product into your body. I mean, how did we get to that? And so that's why we are suing.
And they'll call homeopathic doctors quacks. They
Absolutely.
have quackwatch.org or .com.
Yeah.
And rather than say, upon what, if you tell me something I don't know, I'll be the first one to say, where did you get that information? Because if I don't know anything about it, I'm going to have to do some research. But I'm not going to deny what you say when I have never done the research. You might be right, you might be wrong. I don't know. In fact, you mentioned you used to work for Goldman Sachs. A guy from Goldman Sachs, we were talking about the Bank for International Settlements. And this big shot, who is a managing partner, whatever they call those guys, he says to me, there's no such thing as the Bank for International Settlements. And I said, what are you talking about? You have to
BIS.
look up on your iPhone, BIS, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of articles. His answer was, if I don't know about it, it can't exist. You see the
Talk about hubris. Talk about hubris, you know.
This
Yeah.
is what's running America.
But see, this exactly, Bob, and I think this is such an important piece for us to unpack. I was one of those people who went to, as I believe you were, who went to these esteemed educational institutions, who had succeeded in that world and all those kinds of things. And those people don't want to think that the system that benefited them is actually bankrupt, morally bankrupt, right? They don't want to
and physically bankrupt.
That too. But the big issue is, I think they don't want to think, well, those doctors I went to the University of Chicago. That doctor went to the University of Chicago Medical School, and that's one of the best medical schools in the country. I wouldn't want to, they must be honest. They must be decent. What they're saying must be true. And this comes back to what you were saying. If we don't have a moral compass, we have nothing. I don't care if you don't believe in God. That's your choice. I totally respect that. But generally speaking, in my view, faith goes with a moral compass. And very few are those who don't believe in anything bigger than themselves, but who still have a moral compass. In fact, I think most of them sort of lean to the more nihilistic approach to life and worldview. And I think that this is what's really dangerous, that these people, this strata, the elite ruling class, they all went to these top institutions, and they don't want to believe that their peeps aren't telling them the truth, or that their peeps don't know what they're talking about, or that the system that benefited them and made them well off and important is actually destructive. For me, I realized it when I was in my late 30s, and I had to get out. I just had to. I felt like I was playing for the wrong team, and so I quit.
You're a very rare person, because as one of the greatest writers I've ever read, a fellow named Bill Bonner, he's mostly a financial letter writer, but he's also a billion-dollar publisher. And he always says, it's amazing what people will say when making a profit depends on them saying it. And so, someone like me or someone like you deserve all the credit in the world, because I know what it feels like to like money and to be making a lot of it, and to no longer be able to do that, because in order to do it, you've got to become a whore. And my wife always said the only thing that stood between me and $1 billion is integrity. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard in this world to have that integrity. And I can tell you that my son and his wife were making $1 million a year on Wall Street, and they gave it all up to be home with their children and to live much more humbly. And that humbleness goes with character, because you begin to learn that all this crap that we care about, driving a Mercedes, a Lexus, it's all such crap. And people are living lives that have no meaning. The famous book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. People today have no meaning, and that's why you're so special. And viewers out there, how to get in touch with you, and how to support you, and how to learn about what you're doing and keep up with everything. Give them where they need to go and how they need to do it.
Sure. Well, Health Freedom Defense Fund You can find us at healthfreedomdefense.org, and you can become a member. It's only $10 to become a member. You can join our newsletter, which we only send out a couple times a month. So it's like once every 2 weeks. We don't bombard you, and we just update you on our legal progress and educational items, maybe some action items, but it's usually like once every 2 weeks. And if may I share a story, because I think it
Sure.
really speaks to what we've just been discussing, and that is that it's two kind of connected stories. First of all, one, I had an experience where one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world came into our offices. My job, I ran Alliance Capital's European growth, portfolio management, and research businesses. I was making a lot of money. And I had position, money, power, everything. But my job was to interview these CEOs and management teams of these multinational corporations and then decide whether or not we should invest in their companies. The CEO of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies came into our offices. Their stock was getting crushed because their new blockbuster drug was killing people in its phase 3 trials. And the CEO looked at me in the meeting and he said, listen, the bad news is the FDA is going to make us put a black box warning on our packaging. The good news is we still think we can do $7 billion in peak sales. This was a seminal moment for me in my career, because I thought I'd never heard someone be that brazen about the trade-off between corporate profits and human life. And here he was saying that. So that happened. And then not long after that, I think it was in the next year, I got the biggest bonus that I'd ever received. And it was more money than I ever thought I'd make in my life. And I came home from the office and I wasn't even thinking about it, but I was standing in front of the refrigerator, opening the door, and my husband said, oh my gosh, did you get your bonus today? Did you meet with your boss? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, what did you get? And I told him, and I started crying. And he said, oh my gosh, are you disappointed? What's wrong? And I said, I'm not disappointed. I'm empty.
Yeah.
I was truly empty, because I got one of the greatest gifts that you can ever receive. And that is to learn at a very young age that money and power and position do not buy happiness. And I started planning my exit, and I got pregnant not long after that. And they said to me, oh, that's okay. You'll get a live-in cook and you'll hire a live-in nanny and everything will be okay. And after my son was born, I went back for 2 months and I just couldn't do it. And I thought, I don't want a cook and a nanny to raise my child. I want to do the most important job I possibly can for myself. And that is to raise my son and raise the most amazing human being I can. And so that's what I did. And I just share it because the work that I do, fighting all of this tyranny, is 100% because I care about my son and about future humanity. I do not want to see people deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I do not want to see an unjust society foisted upon us. And so I fight, and I don't pay myself anything. I do it all volunteer, just because I want to make a difference on the planet. And so, I'm saying this just so that people understand where I'm coming from, that I started Health Freedom Defense Fund because I wanted to make a difference. And we've sued the Biden administration 3 times and we haven't lost yet.
That's great. Do you ever get confused from Bobby Kennedy's Children's Health Defense Fund?
Yes. We work with them. We do a lot of work together with them. Sometimes I know all of them. I know Bobby, I know the president, Mary Holland, and many of the other people who work there, doing such good work. We do get confused, but then people also know me because of my movie, The Greater Good, which people can watch at greatergoodmovie.org. And it's the first sort of major documentary that was ever made about the whole vaccine debate and why we have a vaccine debate. And I urge people to go and watch it because I believe it's more relevant today than it was when it came out in 2011. Now people understand what we were trying to communicate to them about the shortcomings of our system for approving vaccinations, the revolving door with government and industry, the fact that you cannot sue the vaccine makers, and the fact that we don't know what all of the effects of these shots are that we're giving to all these kids.
Because you're such a bright woman, which these days is an oxymoron. But because you're such a bright woman, I'm going to raise an issue with you that I need to raise with Bobby Kennedy and people who want justice, not your typical Biden Democrats or Nancy Pelosi or Newsom and all these creeps. I'm talking about well-intentioned people. They don't understand that any government big enough to give you things is big enough to take it all away. And I used to tell this to Republicans all the time that wanted to go after people they don't like. And I would say to them, don't you understand? If you can take away the rights of a person you don't like, one day Hillary Clinton will get into power who you don't like, and they'll go after you. So you've got to be for freedom and freedom for everybody. And yet, I heard Bobby Kennedy giving a speech, and he said a lot of great things. But he also talked about the fact that we have to give programs, social welfare programs. Look, you were on Wall Street. You were not the socialist. Wall Street is the socialist. I am a true right-winger. That means I'm 100% consistent. Whatever way I come down on an issue is totally predictable. Because if you're against welfare for the poor, as I am, because nobody has a right to my money or anyone else's. But if I'm going to be against it for the poor, I better be against it for Wall Street. And of course, the great point that Bobby Kennedy makes is that we've got a socialist system for the creeps on Wall Street. And my attitude is, if you want to go to Las Vegas and gamble away your money, that's fine. I have no problem with it. But just don't expect me to reimburse you. And that's what we're doing here. I don't want anybody reimbursed. You're on
100%. Let me take it to specifically hone in on the health freedom issue to make this point. So we don't want corporate cronyism, right? We don't want to live under a corporatocracy. But when you give $100 billion in subsidies to big ag, that's exactly what you have. And then they dictate what food you have access, what food is accessible to you. I don't want that. In the very same vein, I 100% oppose vaccine exemptions. Why is that? Because I don't think anybody has the power or the authority to tell me what I can or can't put in my body. I shouldn't be asking the government or anybody for an exemption. The government shouldn't assume that it has the power or authority to dictate my behavior to me. So I'm 100% with you, Bob. I mean, listen, I've come very, very far, and I 100%, I believe that the smallest government is the best government, and that government should never have the power or authority to dictate how we live our lives or what we do, what we put into our bodies, what cars we drive, what light bulbs we use. This is a huge issue. Government, the bigger it is a problem. I don't understand why we go to why our legislatures meet every year, and what do? They just pass more laws. Do we need so many more laws today than we had 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? I don't think so.
I always make the point that if I have a business and I rip you off, I'm only affecting you, and you can go to court and sue me. But if I'm big government and I screw you, I screw the whole country. And that's why small can only do a limited amount of damage, and big can do total damage, which is why America is heading for another Great Depression, not a recession, a Great Depression. And as a lawyer who represents businesses who were shut down, not by COVID, they always say, oh, COVID shut it down. No, the government shut it down. And they destroyed so many of my clients. Are typical Greek diner owners, small business people. They're all broke. They were wiped out, and what it did to their families, to their marriages, to kids becoming alcoholics, drug addicts. They absolutely destroyed physically, spiritually, and of course, economically, an entire population. Our time is running out, Zoom is telling me. It was a great pleasure to speak to you. Most people, when they speak to me, say it's a great pressure to speak to me, but you is a pleasure. And
It was
God,
a pleasure.
and I'm joining your organization and all you people out there. This woman is out there trying to help you. She's not there trying to make a buck, because she could have stayed on Wall Street and ripped all of America off very easily. They do a great job of that. So God bless you, Leslie, and God bless your family. And we'll talk again, I assure you.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be with you.
Thank you.